Well, folks, in today's video, we're going to be continuing work on the layout. If you haven't seen my previous videos, basically over the last 8 or so months, I've been slowly putting together a layout for a family friend's son. And in this video, I hope to more or less finish it off. Since last time, I did go out and buy some more materials. We got some various pine trees and even a couple locomotives. That way, once this thing is operational, we'll have something to run on it. So we'll get started. I think we'll begin with the downtown core over here. Before we go building anything, we got a clean house. And now all we got to do is actually lay it all out. So you can see right here I cut the road at a bit of an angle just to give it a little bit more of a natural look. It's going to turn out even better once it's actually attached to the layout, but for now I want to paint everything. Now for the paint, I'm going to be using a matte finish gray as well as a black just to darken it. I find using a matte finish is really good for roads because they naturally have a bit of a dull look, and this chalk paint works pretty well, but you can use other stuff. So the first layer is mostly finished drying. Unfortunately, I didn't mix up my paint perfectly and it left some streaks, so I'm going to repaint this, but it's also lighter than I would have liked, so I'm going to add a little bit more black paint and we can just darken this up, and this should be a good primer layer, so I think it will turn out alright. I'm pretty happy with how this latest layer of paint is turning out. I know it still looks a little bit uneven, but that's mostly just because it's not finished drying, so we'll judge once it actually is done. Until then, what I really want to start working on is actually ballasting the track. It's not the most fun job out there, but it's going to make this layout look a lot better, and there are some tips I've learned over the years which I'll share with all of you. To ballast your track, you need 4 things. The first one is the obvious one. The second one is glue. The third is some kind of a brush to actually just spread the ballast. And the final one really should never be overlooked, and this is just water mixed with some dish liquid, and it's in a little spritzer which will create a fine mist. And this is really important because you need to put this over your ballast to break the tension, otherwise the glue will not sink in properly. And what I find works pretty well is just applying some in the middle, and as you brush it on, it will kind of fall off to the sides and give you what you're looking for. And once you get most of the ballast cleared off the ties, you take the back of your brush and you just lightly tap the track, and you'll see all the loose pieces of ballast will sort of make their way into place. Once you get the ballast to a state which you desire, just spray some of your water dishwashing mix over the top, and put a good amount of this, because if you don't put enough, the glue will just sit on top of the ballast. It will ruin it. So with most of the bottom layer done, I think I'm going to start working on the top layer here. This should be fairly straightforward. However, there are some little gaps along the line where ballast can actually sink in, and it will fill the entire area under there, which is not good because this stuff is pretty expensive. So we're going to go through and just seal up all the gaps with some hot glue. So the hot glue tricks seem to work pretty well on the sides, unfortunately not so much for the middle, so I'm going to have to figure out something to fix that, but I think in the meantime, I'll focus on this last area of track. I did go ahead and add little bits of foam just so that these gaps won't have to be filled, which should save quite a bit of ballast. As for ballasting switches, you have to be very careful because you don't want to get ballast in the frog or any of the other flange ways. You need to keep those completely clear because if ballast gets caught in here, the switch won't move all the way and you'll have derailments. Got all the ballast glued down and I'm pretty happy with how it's looking so far. One thing that you should always be mindful of though is to make sure that your switches don't lock up. You can see I got a little bit of glue in this one, so I'll have to remove that later. Now as for dealing with the gap issue, I've come up with a solution. It's not very fancy, but it does work. Basically you just kind of wind up a little ball of cotton here and using a nail just kind of darn it in the hole. And now I just need to do this to all the rest of them on the layout and it should fix this. While the ballast dries out, I think we'll start working on this retaining wall right here. A lot of people mentioned that this thing looked unnatural, and I really can't agree more, so I went and found some off-cuttings from my Hershey factory project, and I cut them to size here, so they're going to go along the edges. Get this all painted up, and I think it will make this all look quite a bit better. So I think at this point we'll focus on actually getting the foundation for the village all glued down now. I've already bent this back into shape so it sits fairly evenly. I'm going to put some weight on top of it once it's glued down to help it. Just to quickly show you, if you need to straighten this stuff out, all you have to do is just kind of gently bend it and it will all sort of conform back into place. Sometimes you get the odd crack, but what road doesn't have those? And I basically just did the same thing with a table surface on a larger scale, and it seemed to work pretty well. So I think at this point I'll start putting some trees down. I got 3 different varieties here, as you can see. We've got the super cheap ones. These are from Amazon. I think it cost about $15 for 50. Next we've got 33 pine trees from Scenics. These were 50 Canadian dollars. Still pretty expensive, but you do get a decent amount. And then finally got the highest end from Bush, and as you can see, these actually cost $85. Certainly not the most economical, although they are beautiful. And for anybody who's wondering how I plant these things, I just poke a bit of a hole in the layout, squirt some hot glue down there, and then just plant it. It's now a few hours later, and I'm really happy with how things are starting to look. I got a little bit of extra ground covered down off camera, and this is now completely attached, so that should be nice and secure for the move. So I think at this point what I want to get to doing is actually putting down the lines on the road, which is not a very neat process, but I've got a metallic pen right here, and I find these work great for this job. I'm gonna go put down some of the buildings just so I can kind of gauge where parking spaces and so on will sort of fit in here. That makes it look like 90% more complete, doesn't it? So with all the lines completed, I think we can start putting some vehicles down on this table. I ordered this lot of 50 cars off of Amazon, and these were $20. And you know, they're not the greatest looking out there. They certainly lack detail, and they're not perfectly to scale. They're a little bit smaller. but for the cost, it's pretty remarkable. You know, if you wanted to use only prototypical vehicles, those cost about $25 a piece, so the fact you can get 50 for 20, it's really a good way to fill out a scene. However, since they do look quite similar to each other, I also bought some other vehicles at a train show, and I think the guy was selling these for 25 cents a piece, which is really a pretty good deal for what you get. You know, there are some ones in here which are not the most realistic, but it will at least add some variety to the scene, and I think make this whole layout look a lot better than just the generic kind. Corella DeVille is going to get a space on this layout. So things are already looking a little bit more lively around here, but we definitely need to add some people just to really kind of complete the scene. And again, cost is a consideration, and I managed to pick, I think, 50 of these off Amazon for $15, which is a pretty good deal. And, you know, the detail is nothing like Woodland Scenics, but from a distance, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. And they should get the job done and just make things look a little more lively around here. The set even comes with Mrs. Doubtfire. Now, as for the railroad crossings, what I'd usually do is just plaster over them and then, you know, cut flangeways in the plaster and paint over that. And it works okay, but I find it does take some trial and error. So what I'm trying to do today is just use some cardboard, or construction paper, I should say. And I've heard some people have had success using this method, so we'll see how it goes. Maybe it will look all right. Well, what does everybody think? I think that they look alright. I don't know if they're as good as the plaster, but I will be curious to see how they perform with the trains, if they mess up the flanges at all or not. So another thing I wanted to tackle is the side of this mountain. It's not very pretty, so my plan is to kind of cover over the side with some foam board, and I think that that will tidy it up a lot. But I want to add some structure to this first, just to make it a little bit more stable. Also have to cut the edge of the mountain so it matches well, and add a couple access ports in case a train derails or the track needs to be cleaned. I already went and built this whole side here off camera, and I'm pretty happy with the results. Now, something I've been meaning to tackle for a while is this bridge. Now, if you remember the first video of this layout construction, this was not supposed to be here. What was supposed to be a lake turned into a river, and I think it looks way better, honestly, but that means that a bridge has to be added on. Anyways, I've already gone ahead and bored everything out, and got this sweet little bridge here, so we're going to install that. The girders are going to go under it, and I'm going to make sure they stay below the level of the rail, just so that they don't interfere with any trains, since this is on a bit of a corner. And I'm thinking to keep the whole farm theme going over here. We'll add some cattle just sort of grazing beside the river. Should complete the scene. So with that scene done, I think that the layout is more or less complete. There are probably some tiny little changes I'll have to do, but I'll take care of that off camera. And I think for now, we should try to run some trains. But first, the track's going to need a bit of cleaning. And you might be wondering why you have to do this on brand new track, and the reason is when you ballast, you add the water and the glue and everything else, and that leaves a layer of oxidization and a bit of glue residue on your track, so that all needs to get removed. You need to use something abrasive. I've got a track bright. You could also probably use something like 1000 grit sandpaper, but I find this does a pretty good job. Well, I think this layout's all good to go in terms of running trains, so we'll get those out in a moment. But before then, I'm sure some of you are probably wondering what happened to the Tech 2. Well, basically, in a previous video, I wired up a double pole, double throw switch to control the two tracks separately, and that system worked pretty well, but I couldn't find a solution to prevent the two cabs from shorting if you tried to run a train from track to track with both cabs running, which I didn't really like. So I replaced it with probably the safest controller out there. It's just one of your Bachmann starter set controllers. These things are pretty weak. This is about a 1 amp controller, so it doesn't really have much juice, but it will get the job done, and the trains which I'm providing with this set use very little amperage, so even though this doesn't kick out much, they're also not going to take much. So this will be the solution for now. Later on, the Tech 2 can be added again, but I think for a youngster, this is probably a much safer option. I'm going to be curious to see how these Walters locomotives run on the layout. I have owned a couple of these before, so I've had some experience, but you never know what you're getting from the factory. Still stock in the metal knuckle couplers. I really like that. Looks good. And now here's an identical locomotive, just in the Canadian Pacific paint scheme. Not half bad, not half bad. This is sort of going to be a moment of truth times 3. We have to see if both these locomotives are in good working order, and if the layout works too. Let's try it out. Well, wrong direction, but... yeah, okay. Canadian Pacific unit is still sending it. I haven't seen the Conrail come out on the other side, so I think it's derailed or lost power. It's not derailed. It seems to be a dirty section of track. I might have to clean all this even though it wasn't ballasted. So now the name of the game is just going to be slowly cranking down the power and seeing where these things either stall out or stutter, and then just cleaning up any spots I might have missed. It's kind of hard to see, but there's just a little spot right there. Well, I've been running these things for about 20 minutes straight at various speeds, and I think I got all the kinks ironed out by just cleaning various bits of the track. In the meantime, I also added a little bit more dirt to the farm scene just to really finish it off. I'm very happy with how it's looking. So I think at this point, the only thing left to do is to actually throw some cars behind both the locomotives and have some fun running a few trains. The Rapido cars you see here are not going to be included with the layout, but I did buy a couple starter sets just so I could put some rolling stock on this thing. I just haven't taken those out of the boxes, so we'll use these for now. It'll be a good way to test out the layout with actual trains. Well, I am very impressed. Everything seems to be working quite well right out of the gate, which is really not what I was expecting. I've had a couple electrical issues with these two switches, so I'll have to do some work there. But other than that, I think that this layout is more or less complete. Just a couple things I wanted to quickly mention before finishing off the video. The first one being that a lot of people were asking if they had my permission to build their own copies of this layout, and my answer to that is absolutely. My entire goal with sharing this thing online was to help inspire people building their own layouts, and if they want to build a sister layout to this one, all the power to them. If you want to reference the channel, I would appreciate it, but obviously I leave that up to you. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that a lot of people who wanted to build copies of this layout were asking if I had a track plan for it. And you might remember that initially this was all drawn out by hand, so I didn't. But I got some track planning software and tried to assemble it all. So I'll include that here, as well as a list of track that you'll need. One thing I would probably advise is getting some track cutters, because there's a couple pieces in the software which didn't quite line up perfectly, so they might need to be snipped. But other than that, go right ahead and build your own copies of it. I think it would be really cool to see this design mass-produced. I'm already aware of two of these things in production before this one's even done. I remember this one time watching an episode of Bob Ross, and he was talking about how whenever he creates a painting, he kind of makes up a story to go along with it. And I try to follow that when building these layouts. So you can see that, you know, a lot of the characters are interacting with each other or looking over something, maybe having an argument about not getting the Aerosmith tickets that they wanted. And I feel like scenes like this just really help to bring a layout to life. Now, as far as this layout goes, this might be the last video you see on the channel of it. We'll have to see, but it's certainly not going to be it for layout construction. I have two videos in mind. The first one being building a layout in a limited amount of space, and the second one I want to do is building a layout on an extremely limited budget. I think both of those would make for some interesting challenges. But just for building a general layout, I am very happy with the results. And I also want to thank everybody who gave me advice along the way. I got so many great comments which really helped guide the construction of this layout and ultimately helped create it to, you know, what it is today.